Hello, my name is Matt Bowser. I'm the Director of Virtual Schools for the Tennessee Department of Education. This training will cover an overview of the Virtual School Monitoring Framework released by the Tennessee Department of Education. Before we discuss the Virtual School Monitoring Framework, I'd like to discuss how the monitoring framework aligns to the Tennessee Department of Education's Best for All strategic initiative. Virtual school monitoring is to drive positive academic outcomes for all students in Tennessee. Student readiness is a key factor of the virtual monitoring framework, and so is teacher efficacy. Through this monitoring process, LEAs and virtual schools will collaborate to drive positive academic outcomes. During this webinar, we'll cover several topics, of which include virtual education statutes and regulations that frame virtual schooling in Tennessee, an overview of virtual monitoring generally, department-provided tools, an overview of both the Virtual School Monitoring Framework document and the Virtual School Monitoring Report template, best practices and recommendations for monitoring, and next steps after monitoring. Let's dive into the laws and rules that govern virtual schools in Tennessee. Public virtual schools are framed by Tennessee Code Annotated 4916-201 through 216. The Tennessee General Assembly passed Public Chapter 492 in 2011. This public chapter is known as the Virtual Public Schools Act. In conjunction with that act, the Tennessee State Board of Education promulgated Rule 05200103.05 subsection 1. This State Board rule thoroughly outlines the requirements LEAs must adhere to operate virtual schools in Tennessee. Both Tennessee Code Annotated and State Board rule together frame virtual schooling in Tennessee. The State Board of Education also clearly delineates the difference between virtual schools and virtual education programs. Both virtual schools and virtual education programs are great tools LEAs can use to offer virtual education to their students. However, they are different. Virtual schools operate as a standalone school with their own school number, accountability data, and also they receive the same resources as a brick and mortar school. A virtual education program operates within a brick and mortar school. It is a class or series of classes offered virtually for students to engage in virtual education. More details can be found in State Board Rule 05200103.05. For the purpose of this virtual monitoring framework, we will discuss virtual schools. Virtual education programs are not part of this framework and should not be evaluated or monitored with this framework. Both Tennessee Code Annotated and State Board Rule outline the LEA's statutory requirements to monitor their virtual schools. For purpose of this training, evaluation and monitoring are used in conjunction. The monitoring process leads to the LEA's evaluation of the virtual school. The evaluation must address the extent to which the virtual school demonstrates increases in student achievement and the accountability and viability of the virtual school. The evaluation must be completed on a standardized template provided by the department. We will discuss the Virtual School Monitoring Report template later in this training. Tennessee Code Annotated and State Board Rule also outline actions that LEAs must take after the monitoring process is completed. Once LEAs finalize their monitoring findings utilizing the standard report template provided by the department, LEAs must post the finalized template on both the LEA and the virtual school's website. Additionally, LEAs must distribute the finalized report to families of enrolled students. LEAs may choose the method in which finalized reports are distributed. In this section, we'll cover an overview of virtual school monitoring. At its core, the purpose of virtual school monitoring is to strengthen virtual schooling in Tennessee. This monitoring process leads to reflection regarding current virtual school practices and procedures. It also provides a way for LEAs and school leadership to collaborate to better their virtual schools, and provides a way for stakeholders to learn how the virtual school performs and operates. In all, it's to better virtual schooling for all students. LEAs may begin the virtual school monitoring process on July 1st each year. The reason for the July 1st start date is to encourage LEAs and virtual schools to include their monitoring findings in the school improvement planning process in Inform TN. Although it is strongly encouraged that LEAs and virtual schools include these findings in the school improvement planning, it is not required that they do so. By December 15th, the LEA and virtual school must post the finalized virtual school monitoring report on both the LEA and virtual school's website, and must distribute the finalized report to families of enrolled students. In addition to this, LEAs must upload the finalized virtual school monitoring report into ePlan by December 15th. The Virtual School Monitoring Framework consists of two documents. These documents are found within ePlan. The documents are the Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview PDF and the Virtual School Monitoring Report Template. The Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview is the same information that's contained in this training. The Virtual School Monitoring Report Template is the template that LEAs will use during the monitoring process to record the monitoring findings, and it's the template that LEAs will use to distribute via their website, the school's website, and to families of enrolled students. This report template is also the template that LEAs will upload into ePlan once the report is finalized. To access the framework documents, LEAs will download them from ePlan. In order to access the documents in ePlan, a user will need to hold LEA level document library access. Your ePlan coordinator or ePlan contact should have information as to who has this user account level currently. More than likely, principals will not have the LEA document library access. Therefore, it's important that LEAs and virtual schools work together to secure these documents from ePlan to start the monitoring process. If an LEA needs to submit a request to have ePlan access granted, they will do so using the form that's linked on this slide. This form is the standard ePlan user access form that you can find in ePlan itself. To access the Virtual School Monitoring Framework documents in ePlan, a user must be logged in. Once they're logged in and have appropriate ePlan access to access the LEA document library, they'll continue on to the 2023 school year. Once they've selected the 2023 school year, they'll click Search Folders and then click the plus sign to the left of the 2023 school year. The user will then navigate to the Virtual School Monitoring Documents folder and select the plus sign. This will expand the folder to show both documents within the Virtual School Monitoring Framework. To download both documents, you'll choose the Edit Document link to the right of the document name. This will open a dialog box in which the user will be able to click on a link to download the file. You'll repeat this step for both files. To upload the finalized Virtual School Report template into ePlan, again, a user must have the appropriate access level. If a user has the access level to download the documents, they have the appropriate access level to upload the documents. Therefore, you will repeat steps 1 through 3 to download the framework files, but rather than downloading the file, you'll click the Upload Document button. Once you've clicked the Upload Document button, you'll be able to choose the file that you would like to upload and name it. When uploading your Finalized Virtual School Monitoring Report, it's important that you name it correctly. The naming convention should be Virtual School Name, then the words Monitoring Report, and then the current school year. For example, ABC Virtual School Monitoring Report 2022-23. Once you've named your document, click the Select button and find the Finalized Virtual School Monitoring Report. Upload the document. It must be in a Microsoft Word format. Once you've uploaded the document, you can give the document a description and then click Save. A document description is not required. In this section, we'll cover the Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document. The Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document is the first of 2 documents that complete the Virtual School Monitoring Framework. The Overview document is the same information found within this presentation. It covers Tennessee statutes and rules that frame virtual schooling in Tennessee. It contains an overview of the assurances, domains, and strands that the LEAs must use in the monitoring process. It also outlines the monitoring requirements, deadlines, and guidance, and the designation methodology used when evaluating a virtual school. It is recommended that virtual school monitoring pre- and post-site visit agendas are followed. However, it is not required. This overview document also contains recommended site visit agendas. Although they are recommended, these site visit agendas are not required. LEAs can have site visit agendas and pre- and post-visit agendas created at their discretion. Instructions for completing the Virtual School Monitoring Report are also found within the Overview document. And lastly, the Overview document contains a glossary of terms and acronyms for virtual school monitoring. As we've discussed before, LEAs must monitor their virtual schools annually using the Tennessee Department of Education's approved Virtual School Monitoring Framework. Virtual schools must provide evidence as defined by the LEA that shows the school's alignment and/or compliance with each monitoring indicator. Monitoring indicators are found within the Virtual School Monitoring Report template. The LEA must complete all sections of the Virtual School Monitoring Report template, and the LEAs must directly distribute the virtual school's monitoring results to all families of enrolled students and post the findings on both the virtual school and the LEA's website. In addition to uploading the finalized Virtual School Monitoring Report findings onto the LEA and Virtual School's website, LEAs must upload the Microsoft Office Word version of the finalized Virtual School Monitoring Report into ePlan by December 15th. The overview document also contains guidance that will help LEAs successfully conduct a monitoring cycle. LEAs should refrain from using internal shorthand or acronyms not commonly known or provided in the glossary. It is recommended that LEAs utilize the implementation guidance found within the Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document, as this guidance will ensure that both LEAs and virtual schools meet the requirements of the monitoring framework. Although this is recommended, it is not required to utilize the step-by-step guidance and implementation guidance within the framework overview. LEAs may choose to use their current procedures and processes for monitoring. The Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document includes recommended monitoring guidelines for LEAs to use. However, LEAs may amend these recommended guidelines to fit their individual needs. Areas that LEAs have autonomy to change are communication methods and frequency of communication during the monitoring process, internal document sharing procedures during the monitoring process, types and amount of evidence that the virtual school is required to submit for each indicator. It should be noted that virtual schools are required to submit evidence for each indicator. However, the LEA has autonomy to decide how much evidence and what kind must be submitted by the virtual school. LEAs also have autonomy to develop, interview, or guiding questions to be used during the monitoring process, and LEAs may choose to use the step-by-step checklist within the framework or can amend it to fit their own needs. Within the Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document, there are required sections that LEAs must utilize during the monitoring process. These areas include the Designation Methodology and Report template, the use of the provided domains, assurances, strands, and indicators as they are written. LEAs must post the finalized report on both the LEA and Virtual Schools websites by December 15th, distribute the finalized report to all enrolled families, and submit the finalized monitoring report in ePlan by December 15th. The Virtual School Monitoring Framework Overview document contains recommended monitoring processes and step-by-step guidance for LEAs to utilize during the monitoring process. It is recommended that LEAs utilize this step-by-step guidance as it will ensure that all required components of the monitoring process are met. LEAs can decide to amend these timeframes to meet their needs. It should be noted that December 15th is a required deadline for all monitoring to be submitted to ePlan, emailed to families of enrolled students, and posted on both the virtual school and the LEA's website. In this section, we'll talk about the Virtual School Monitoring Report template. The Virtual School Monitoring Report template is the second and final document within the Virtual School Monitoring Framework. This is the document that LEAs will complete during the monitoring process. It will be sent out to families of enrolled students, posted on the Virtual School and LEA's website, and uploaded into ePlan upon the completion of the monitoring process. This report template includes several sections that LEAs will complete during the monitoring process. It includes the school designation finding and monitoring results, LEA and school level directory information, LEA and school accountability data. This accountability data is taken directly from the Tennessee State Report Card for the school. During the 22-23 school year, LEAs should use accountability data from the previous school year, which would be the 21-22 school year, to complete this report template. The report template also includes an explanation of the designation methodology, assurances and indicators that LEA will use to monitor the virtual school, and recommended questions for the LEA to use during the monitoring process, and recommended evidence for the virtual school to submit during the monitoring process. The LEA ratings and monitoring indicators and rationales for the ratings are also included in this report template. Lastly, a glossary of terms and acronyms are included in the report template to aid stakeholders when interpreting the results of the report. The purpose of the monitoring report is to provide LEAs a systematic approach to communicate notable areas of strength and areas for improvement for the virtual school. It also provides stakeholders a consolidated yearly snapshot of the operational, fiscal, and academic practices within the virtual school. It provides LEAs a systematic approach to ensure that the virtual school aligns to state statutes and rules. Remember, the different assurances and indicators are inspired by or aligned to state statutes and rules found in Tennessee Code Annotated and State Board of Education Rule. It also fulfills the statutory and regulatory requirements of virtual school monitoring. Finally, the report provides information for the department to review, report on, and support LEAs in their virtual education practices if needed. Monitoring domains, assurances, strands, and indicators are the backbone of the virtual school monitoring framework. Domains are high-level topics that LEAs are statutorily required to monitor during the monitoring cycle. Domains include instruction, fiscal management, and school operation. Within each domain live assurances or statements that are drawn from either Tennessee statutes or Tennessee State Board of Education rules pertaining to virtual schools. These assurances will allow LEAs to ensure the virtual school complies with statutes, rules, and regulations that pertain to virtual schools. Strands are subtopics within the monitoring domain, and within strands live indicators. Indicators are specific monitored items that are aligned to state statute, regulation, and/or Tennessee instructional leadership standards. This information represents the anatomy of a monitoring domain. As you can see, Domain 1, Instruction, includes Strand 1.1, Instructional Practices and Procedures. Strand 1.1 includes Indicator, Instructional Practices and Procedures 1. The indicator reads, show with school-level data that the school demonstrates increases in student achievement and that the school is meeting or exceeding the LEA's required accountability targets. Citations that inspired this indicator are listed in the Citations column. Recommended evidence for LEAs to use during the monitoring process are listed in the Recommended Evidence column. Recommended interview questions to utilize during the interview process are located in the Recommended Interview Question column. And lastly, the Final Rating and Rationale column includes the final rating for this indicator. LEAs must choose one of the ratings within the indicator. Additionally, LEAs must enter a rationale as to why the LEA chose that specific rating, and should list any evidence that the virtual school supplied during the monitoring process. Within the virtual school monitoring report template is a Designation Methodology section. This section outlines the methodology that LEAs must use to calculate designation levels for the virtual school. These designation levels are calculated with a series of tables and also numeric values, which we'll go over next. Within the Designation Methodology section is the Assurance Rating Table. If you remember, each monitoring domain has associated assurances that are drawn from either statute or state board rule. For each assurance within the report, the LEA's Director of School or the Director of School's designee will choose either yes or no, signifying that the virtual school is either in compliance or is in non-compliance with the assurance. If the virtual school is non-compliant with the assurance, the LEA and virtual school should work collaboratively to come up with a plan for the virtual school to be in compliance with the assurance. The table outlines a numerical value for compliant assurances and a numerical value for non-compliant assurances. Compliant assurances will equal 1, non-compliant assurances equal 0. This information represents indicator ratings that LEAs are required to use during the monitoring process. LEAs are required to rate each indicator through the monitoring framework. If an LEA identifies evidence as fully meeting the indicator, the LEA will rate that specific indicator with fully meets the indicator. If the LEA decides that the evidence partially meets the indicator, the LEA will rate it partially meets the indicator, so on and so forth. Please keep in mind, to fully meet the indicator, the school must provide evidence that aligns fully with the elements addressed in the indicator, and they must provide evidence that shows fulfillment or compliance of the indicator. Each indicator rating requires virtual schools to submit evidence. As you can see, in the does not meet the indicator rating, the school will receive this score if the school does not provide evidence, or the school provides evidence that does not address the indicator, or if the school does not provide evidence that satisfies the elements addressed in the indicator. Please remember that LEAs can determine what evidence is required and how much evidence is required of the virtual school. However, evidence must be submitted to either fully meet the indicator or partially meet the indicator. Indicator not applicable can be chosen if the LEA determines that the virtual school does not have information for that indicator. An example of this would be ready graduate information for a K-8 school. In that instance, a K-8 school would not meet that specific indicator's requirements. Therefore, the indicator can be marked as not applicable. However, the LEA must put a rationale as to why the indicator is not applicable. Indicator ratings have a numeric value assigned to them. Fully meets the indicator is a 1, partially meets the indicator 0.5, and does not meet the indicator is a 0. Indicators that are not applicable do not have a numeric score. LEAs will calculate the virtual school's designation level using the below formula. The designation level equals the sum of the indicator ratings plus the sum of the assurance ratings divided by the number of applicable indicators plus the number of assurances times 100. This will yield a percentage, which you will use to find the overall rating in the next table. Once the LEA has completed rating each indicator, they will take the sum of the indicator ratings plus the sum of the assurance ratings and divide it by the number of applicable indicators plus the number of assurances and multiply that by 100. This will yield a percentage. This is the percentage of indicators that meet the LEA's expectation. The LEA will then take that percentage and align it to the Designation Levels table to output an overall designation level of either meeting expectations, approaching expectations, or below expectations. The overall designation and findings section of the Virtual School Monitoring Report template will include the LEA's overall findings. It will include an overall designation level of meeting expectations, approaching expectations, or below expectations. Additionally, it will include the overall findings, strengths, notable areas for improvement, and plan to address the notable areas for improvement. In addition to the overall designation and findings section of the report template, each domain has its own designation and findings section. It is similar to the overall designation and findings section. The difference is that you'll use the sum of the domain-specific indicator ratings plus the sum of the domain-specific assurance ratings divided by the number of applicable domain-specific indicators plus the number of domain-specific assurances multiplied by 100. Again, that will yield a percentage of indicators that meet the LEA's expectations. You will then use the Designation Levels table to identify which designation level aligns to that specific domain. This information represents the overall designation and findings section of the Virtual School Monitoring Report template. This is an example of a completed overall designation and findings section. As you can see, the LEA has selected that this virtual school is meeting their expectations. In addition, the LEA has completed each section of this overall designation and findings area. Take note that most sentences refer back to the evidence that the virtual school supplied during the monitoring process. This is just a recommendation of how LEAs should complete the overall designation and finding section. Although it is required that LEAs complete it, LEAs may choose the verbiage that suits their specific needs. The purpose of the school snapshot within the Virtual School Monitoring Report template is to provide stakeholders with an overview of the school's student population, instructional model, and type of enrollment options that the school offers. The different term definitions for enrollment type and instructional model can be located in the glossary within the report template itself. To compile data to complete the school snapshot section of the report template, LEAs may use their student information systems or may use EIS data. If LEAs choose to use EIS data, a good place to find this information is within the Director's Membership Attendance by Period report in the EIS reports. It's best to use end-of-month membership when reporting these numbers. Additionally, LEAs should use the last completed reporting periods numbers to populate the school snapshot information section. The next few slides provide technical information that helps LEAs pull data for the school snapshot section of the Virtual School Monitoring Report template. To compile the number of enrolled students with a disability within the virtual school, LEAs may use the Special Education Students Research Query within the EIS reports. LEAs should only count students with a type of service of P and that hold a minimum of one primary option. To compile the number of enrolled students that are economically disadvantaged, LEAs may use the Student Classifications Research Query in EIS. LEAs should only count students with a type of service of P and that hold at least one of the following student classifications: FOS 01, H, I, J, or U. When compiling accountability data, LEAs must use the Tennessee State Report Card data from the previous school year. For example, if the Virtual School Monitoring Report template is being completed for the 22-23 school year, the LEA should use accountability data from the 21-22 school year to complete this section. If a data point is non-applicable, for example, if the virtual school is a K-8 school, and it's asking you to put ready graduate information in the accountability section, the school can put NA for not applicable. If the data is not available, maybe the school opened this year and doesn't have accountability data for the previous year, the school can put not available for each section that is not available. The next few slides outline guidance that will help LEAs find the accountability data within the state report card. Please keep in mind that this guidance was based off of the 2020-2021 state report card, and the location of these data points may have changed for the 21-22 state report card. As LEAs complete the report template, the director of schools or their designee must ensure that all assurances are either marked yes or no for compliance. Each assurance that is marked no must also include an action plan that the virtual school must take to come into compliance with that assurance. LEAs must select a rating for each indicator during the monitoring process. Additionally, LEAs must provide the rationale as to why they chose the rating for each indicator and the evidence that the virtual school provided. For indicators that are not applicable, for example, a K-8 virtual school would not have a rating for indicators that deal with already graduate information. The LEA can choose indicator not applicable. If the LEA chooses indicator not applicable for a specific indicator, the LEA must provide rationale as to why it was chosen. The Virtual School Monitoring Report Template has been provided to LEAs in a Microsoft Word format. This Word document has editing restrictions applied by default. However, these editing restrictions do not have password protection. Therefore, LEAs can remove the editing restrictions if needed. LEAs should use the final report template as it is provided, and sections should not be added, removed, or rearranged within the template. LEAs should remove the instructional text in the narrative fields when completing those narrative fields with the monitoring findings. Use Open Sans or Open Sans Light font to match the report template's text. It is permissible to correct formatting issues if they arise during the completion of the template. However, nothing should be added to the layout of the report template. The final report template is most easily edited in the Microsoft Word desktop app. LEAs may edit the template in Google Docs or Office 365. However, it will greatly affect the formatting of the final document. Therefore, it is strongly recommended that the Microsoft Word desktop app be used to edit this document. Lastly, LEAs should export the Finalized Virtual School Monitoring Report as a non-editable PDF before posting for stakeholders. The department needs the Microsoft Word version uploaded into ePlan upon the completion of the monitoring process. This section will cover steps that the LEA should take after the monitoring process has concluded. Upon the conclusion of virtual school monitoring, LEAs should create action steps to address any monitoring findings. LEAs have autonomy as to when and how to create action steps. LEAs in virtual schools should prioritize action steps to correct non-compliant assurances, as assurances are drawn directly from statute and/or rule. LEAs and virtual schools may and are encouraged to include monitoring findings and action steps within the school improvement planning process in Inform TN. However, this is not required. The department will review all uploaded reports and offer any support if needed. As we conclude this training, we want to leave you with resources that will help you in your virtual education endeavor. Statute and regulation resources can be found both at the Tennessee Code annotated link provided and the State Board of Education Rule Policy and Guidance link provided. Additionally, you can find information for virtual schooling on the Tennessee Department of Education's virtual school website and access the framework documents with an ePlan from the ePlan website. If you haven't spent time reviewing the newly updated State Board rules regarding virtual education, I highly recommend that you spend time reading those, digesting those, and ensuring that you are in compliance with those. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Matt Bowser, the Director of Virtual Schools for the Tennessee Department of Education. Feel free to email me and call me anytime. I would love to be a thought partner with you to better virtual education in your district.